Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today is another episode of the SL Show. And we're going to start off, as always, by taking a look at some of the games from last night. And the first one for me is going to be the Lakers taking out the Jazz. And this was a big game for a lot of people. This was a big stretch for a lot of people with the Lakers because it's pretty well known that even though they had the best record through the first 20 or so games, they had one of the easier schedules in the league during that time. So people were taking them seriously. But a lot of people were kind of waiting around saying, okay, once they start playing some better teams, we'll either A, know that they're legit, or B, know that they're not actually as good as their record through the first 20 games would indicate. And that stretch began with these two games against the Nuggets last night, or the Nuggets 2 nights ago, and then the Jazz last night. And so far, the Lakers have passed that test. They beat both teams pretty handily. The Nuggets game was relatively close, but the Jazz really wasn't all that close. And it continues to be the combination of Anthony Davis and LeBron James, plus their role players continuing to step up. Guys like Dwight Howard really look good for this team, and it's just really interesting to see such an engaged LeBron James, such an engaged Anthony Davis on both ends of the floor, a guy that is probably Defensive Player of the Year material at this point, like he said he would be before the beginning of the season. And I don't know, like I'm feeling more and more confident in this team's ability to actually be a conference finals and finals team after these two games. Now, this is going to continue to be a tough stretch for them. I believe they have one of, if not the toughest schedules in the league throughout the month of December. So before we get to the new year, we're going to know a lot more about this Lakers team. But if they stay on this pace in terms of winning games, they're going to be a lot more legit of a threat than I thought they would be. I thought they'd be good, but I didn't necessarily think that they had the role players to make it work on a championship level around LeBron and AD. But if those guys are healthy and these role players continue to play this way, they're looking more and more legit. But the other part of this in terms of last night's game is the Utah Jazz, and they continue to struggle. Joe Ingles is having his worst season over his last couple. Mike Conley continues to struggle, and this is a team that's always been a little bit of a late bloomer during the season, so I'm not panicking about them. And they got off to a pretty good start, which was relatively surprising, but they've been struggling as of late. They've had some injury issues to deal with Gobert being out and things like that. But I'm looking to see them potentially turn this thing around the closer we get to the All-Star break and get on a really good run at the end of the year like they typically do. And then moving on now to the second game that I want to talk about from last night, and that is Mavs Timberwolves. And the reason here is not to talk about Luka Doncic the entire time, but to talk about the other guys, because I think there's kind of this narrative going around that Luka is carrying this Mavs team. And it's not a great team around him. Like, Porzingis hasn't been Knicks level Porzingis, all-star level. He's still been good. He's been making shots. He's been pretty good defensively even, but he hasn't been the all-around force that he was in New York. But he's also not really being put in a position to do that. He's being put in a position to be more of a complementary player around Doncic anyway. But there's other guys on this roster that are really contributing well for them. Tim Hardaway Jr. is kind of up and down from a scoring standpoint. Every other game, you never really know what you're going to get from him, but he can still make some shots. Dwight Powell is a really high-energy guy rolling to the rim that allows Porzingis to be more of a spot-up shooter while Powell handles the inside stuff. On offense, they've got players like Seth Curry making shots off the ball. Dorian Finney-Smith is a solid defender. And it all just really seems to work around Luka. And one of the concerns I had about this team coming into the year was it didn't appear as though they had a ton of really good perimeter defenders, but they haven't really needed them. Like, they've got Dorian Finney-Smith if they really need to use it. But this team uses zone a lot, and it really caused the Timberwolves issues last night. The Mavs were down double figures in the second half, and they went to the zone, and the Timberwolves just didn't have a ton of answers for that. So the Mavs have some options, despite the fact that their personnel outside of Luka isn't outstanding. But I do want to give those guys some credit because they have been playing well. It's not just Luka completely carrying some awful team. And I also want to give a shout out to the Timberwolves because that's a really tough team to play against. I mean, they can put out some lineups defensively with Culver and Covington and Okogie, and it is an absolute nightmare to try and score against that perimeter group. Karl Anthony Towns looks fantastic inside, outside, has one of the quickest big man three-point releases in the league, continues to shoot a high volume and a high percentage from three. Their issue is just at the point guard spot, and they've kind of just gone away from using Jeff Teague in the starting lineup in general and putting Jarrett Culver in there and having Andrew Wiggins do more of the playmaking and then Teague coming off the bench. But if they were able to upgrade that spot, this team would be even more of a threat than they are right now. But if Culver can continue to develop, Covington and Okogie and Towns and Wiggins and all those guys continue to get better, this is a team that's going to be good for the next couple of years, which is kind of surprising given the situation they were in coming into the season. Next up now, let's talk about one of the bigger stories over the past 3 or so days in the NBA that I haven't really gotten a chance to talk about because I haven't done one of these shows, and that's the Houston Rockets losing to the San Antonio Spurs. I believe at this point it was 2 nights ago. in double overtime. They lost by 2, 135-133, I believe, in double overtime to the Spurs. And the reason this was a big deal was because with about 8 minutes left in the game, James Harden got a steal, went on the breakaway, went up for a dunk, and the ball went through the net, but then back out the net from underneath and then up. And it basically made it look like he missed the dunk, even though he made it. And the refs missed the call. They didn't count the basket. The Rockets didn't challenge it in time because there's like a 30-second rule. You have to challenge within 30 seconds of the play, and they didn't do that. And then the game ended up going to overtime, and the Rockets lost in overtime. Now, a couple of things here. One, the Rockets were up 13 at the time that the call was missed, and there was like a little less than 8 minutes left. So they held a 13-point lead with less than 8 minutes left. It would have been 15, granted. But the reason that the Rockets are making a big deal out of this is because they feel like they scored more points than the Spurs in regulation because that basket should have counted, and so they should just either outright win the game or they should replay the last 8 minutes of the game. And this is just really irritating because my immediate reaction to this is, okay, don't lose a 13-point lead with 8 minutes left of the game, and this isn't an issue. You outplayed the Spurs for the majority of the game, and then you got killed the last 8 minutes. That's why you lost. You didn't lose because of a missed call on a basket that should have counted, because you can't just assume that the rest of the game is going to happen the exact same way for the rest of the 8 minutes if that bucket goes in. There's a butterfly effect to all these things. Every possession would have been different or could have been different. You can't just assume that you're going to win the game by 2 if they count that basket, because there are plenty of calls, and this is just the nature of basketball. Even if you get 90% of the calls correct from an officiating crew, the nature of basketball is that there are points lost and made on every single possession based off of referee calls, whether it's out of bounds calls that they mess up that you would have gotten an extra shot on, whether it's free throws that a team shouldn't have gotten. There's so many different things throughout a game that refs ultimately decide whether they're correct or incorrect with the call. They decide probably 10 or so points throughout a game. And I understand that this was so much more direct because this was an actual basket that should have counted, but that's why the challenge rule is in place. And to my understanding, the only reason it didn't get challenged was because the Rockets were complaining the whole time and they didn't decide to challenge it in time. Now, I could be incorrect on that, but at the end of the day, like, just win the game, right? Like, you can't just say we would have won if this basket had counted, because you had every opportunity the rest of the way. You're up 13 with 8 minutes left. There's plenty of plays that I'm sure the Rockets could have made. They could have made some shots and they didn't, and that's why they lost, not because of this one call. So this idea that they're going to replay the game or just give the Rockets the win is absolutely ridiculous and sets an enormous precedent if they were to somehow go through with it, that every team could just complain and get upset and protest the game and say we need to replay it because you missed a foul call at 8 minutes. That's why the challenge thing is in place. So it's just kind of ridiculous that this even became a thing. And last up now, we have our headline of the day. And this one reads from Yahoo Sports: NBA teams are terrified of the Warriors 2020 draft pick, Tom Haberstroh says. And this basically comes down to the fact that the Warriors are having an awful season. They have one of the worst, if not the worst, records in the league as of the recording of this video. And they are looking at potentially or probably a top 3 to top 5 draft pick, depending on how the lottery shakes out. But it's an interesting situation because they're not a bad team, just their entire roster is injured. Draymond's missed games, D'Angelo Russell's missed games, Curry's out for a couple months, Klay Thompson wasn't going to play for most of the season, if at all, and those are their 4 best players, and they're all out with injury, and now they're having to use their role players in high usage, and Eric Pascal has looked good, but most of the other guys haven't looked good at all. And it's creating this weird situation where they're going to end up with a top pick and get 4 all-star caliber players back and healthy next year to add to that guy. And if they pick the right player or make the right trade, suddenly they're right back at the top of championship contention like they have been for the last couple of years. And that's basically what the article mentions. It says that the league is scared that the Warriors are going to end up with like the first overall pick and get some outstanding player that fits perfectly within their system, or they're going to use what is probably going to be a top 5 pick to trade for another all-star to add to their core, and then that's going to make them even more dangerous as well. And it basically says that this idea of a potential gap year could become more popular if the Warriors end up having success with it. So like if a team is having some injury issues that was supposed to be really good, they might just take the season off and just say, no, you guys, take your time with your rehab. Let's get this top pick. And then from there, we'll, just kind of bring those guys back, and then we've got this great rookie or potentially a trade piece. And I don't necessarily know that that's going to be the case, because this is such an extreme circumstance where the Warriors, like, they didn't do this on purpose, right? Like, it's not like they're just saying, oh, we need to bench all of our guys. Like D'Angelo Russell played last night, not that it made much of a difference, but they would much rather have all of their guys healthy right now. It's just a circumstance that they find themselves in, and it would be really, really difficult for a contending team to put themselves in a situation like this where all of their guys are hurt and then suddenly they're one of the 5 worst teams in the league. Like I can kind of remember like the Lakers stuff last year where LeBron got hurt at Christmas and he basically shut it down the rest of the way, and they ended up with a top 4 pick because of lottery luck, and they traded that for Anthony Davis. But that was such an extreme circumstance as well that these two things are probably going to be isolated incidents. But I don't blame the rest of the league for being scared, because like if the Warriors end up with like James Wiseman or some other really good big guy that could fit with the rest of their group, then they're going to be one of the best teams. They're probably going to be one of the best teams in the league next year regardless, but when you add in what I would hope would be a rookie, and they would take advantage of the cost-controlled asset being a rookie that's going to be making, $10 to $11 million a year rather than trading for a star that's going to be making 30 considering their payroll situation, they're going to be one of the best teams in the league next year. And I'm really interested to see how this kind of works out with this, like as it was put in the article, this gap year situation. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.